Hi, my name is Adelaide Asterix, and I'm here with Eagle TV to tell you the top 10 tips for flirting with trans people. A lot of people feel attracted to trans people but don't know how to approach them or might feel nervous about doing so. So this video is just to give you tips for approaching a trans person that you might be interested in, either online or IRL. Don't forget to like and subscribe by the buttons below. And I'm going to also link some resources for people who want to read more about this topic. Just remember that all these tips are coming from my personal experience as a trans woman, but also my time in trans communities. Number 10 in my tips for flirting with trans people: be receptive. Pay attention to the way that the person you're interested in is presenting themselves, talking about themselves. Pay attention to things like body language, bios. This will all give you hints and clues as to how to approach someone respectfully and hit it off. If someone clearly isn't interested in you, back off. So number 9 is be respectful. Don't say weird, creepy, sexual stuff straight off the bat. It's probably a bad strategy for most people, and most trans people already feel or are faced with a lot of sort of fetishization in their daily lives that they don't need someone else contributing to that. If you're interested in someone, make them feel like they're a human being. I know that sounds quite simple, but I think it's a good thing to remember if you're approaching someone in terms of what trans people have to face every day. Giving basic respect is sadly something that we have to remind people of. Number 8, do your research. Do you know what the difference between a trans guy and a trans girl is? Are you across terminology to do with non-binary people that you might be interested in? If you don't know these things, then it's very important that you go and do your own independent research. So obviously if you're watching this video, you're partway there, but I would encourage you to seek out multiple sources of information and not just listen to me and my opinion. Research is really important because a lot of trans people are faced with having to educate people that are interested in them or their lovers about how to deal with them, how to approach them, even sometimes the basic facts of our existence. All this stuff can be found with a very basic Google search. So you're not demanding extra labor from the person that you kind of just want to get to know and have fun with. So if you feel weird about your desire in any way, which a lot of people do, I would encourage you to deal with this independently instead of asking a trans person to help you deal with it that possibly you don't even know them that well. Deal with it privately, and you can do that through research, through reading, things like that. So I'm going to put some links down in the video description for you to explore. So number 7 in my tips for flirting with trans people: reconsider your assumptions. So this is something that's often repeated in education about what transness is and who trans people are, because most cis people don't know the basic facts of trans life. So any assumptions you might have from media or an article you read once, or trans people you might know as friends but not romantically, they're not going to give you a super stable grounding for making an assumption about any trans person you might meet as a stranger that you might be interested in. So don't make assumptions about the sort of sex that someone might want to have, how they might refer to themselves. Really question all of these things, especially if you're cis and especially if you have not that much experience of trans people, because you're probably going to be wrong. I also want to add that making an assumption that trans people have been through a lot of trauma is quite a common thing in my experience. It's kind of a turn off if you're trying to flirt with somebody, and not all trans people have been through hell. Number 6 in my tips for flirting with trans people: don't misgender us. Misgendering is when you refer to someone with a name or a word that doesn't correspond with how their gender is. So it can be quite offensive for trans people, especially because we face a lot of that like throughout our childhoods, and you probably don't want to make that mistake when you're trying to flirt with someone, because it's a really quick way to like not only offend someone but shut down conversation. So find out the person you're interested in's pronouns and then refer to them accordingly. It's not that hard, but if you find yourself making mistakes, it's okay to practice in private, and giving that basic courtesy to someone is a fast way to show that you respect them and that you like them. So if you fuck up, that's okay. Just apologize sincerely and move on. You can show that you know the right pronoun by using it later in a confident way. Number 5, don't ask about our genitalia. So this sounds actually ridiculous that I have to say this, but this is such a common mistake. For context, government, medical professionals, the media have a long history of trying to define trans people by whatever genitalia they might have. So we don't really need our lovers or people who are interested in us doing the same thing. So it feels weird and invasive to ask any person that question, especially if it's coming straight off the bat. So some trans people will volunteer whether or not they've had surgery, but if not, it's a good idea just to use your common sense. If it really, really matters to you and you really want to find out what equipment someone has, for example, in like a hookup setting, a way around this is to just like share that, for example, you're really keen to get topped, or you really want to suck, or something like this, and then see what the person says, rather than demanding information from someone who may or may not be willing to share that. Tip number 4. Trans women are women and trans men are men. So trans people aren't just cut-ups of the two sexes. We're not Frankenstein science projects. We are coherent individuals with whole bodies. We're not like a third category. So that's really important to clear up, especially if you're attracted to one of these sorts of people. A lot of straight guys who are into trans women will have a crisis of identity because they think that they're gay or bi for being into that. Trans women are one kind of women, and trans men are one kind of men, just like people are short or Italian, you know, it doesn't change the gender that they have. Number 3 in my top 10 tips for flirting with trans people: see non-binary people for who they are. So I used to identify as non-binary, and I had they them pronouns for like a good few years of my transition. And I noticed that a lot of people during that period would try and put a gender on me, especially in a romantic or a hookup setting, in order to make themselves feel comfortable and to have the sort of like mental landscape that they wanted. And I think this is like really wrong, because you should be able to see non-binary people for who they are instead of putting so much onto them about what you wish they were. So see people in their ambiguity or their in-betweenness, if in fact they are that. So for some non-binary people, their gender can shift during sex. So how someone is in the streets, we all know, isn't necessarily who they are in the sheets. So body parts can change meaning, pronouns can change, and also that goes for all trans people, is like things can change over time. Tip number 2, we don't owe you anything. So trans people don't need to show you ID. We don't need to provide medical histories. We don't need to send you nudes, and we don't need to educate you, as I mentioned before. We're just living our lives here. If you're confused or if you're into us, it's up to you to prove that you're worthy of that attention. Unless we're getting paid handsomely, we're not here to fulfill a fantasy for you or bring your sexuality to a new level. And my top tip for flirting with trans people: number 1, be confident. The more cool and relaxed you are, the more likely you're going to be able to form a connection with someone and things are going to get steamy. I would recommend that you not only demonstrate your confidence, but feel it. Own your desires. Know yourself. If you're feeling any sort of shame or uncertainty, again, I would recommend that you deal with this in private instead of putting that onto a trans person and expecting them to clean up that psychological mess for you. Don't feel too nervous if you're having a first-time experience. Just go with the flow, be natural, take risks, be open-minded, and have fun.